What's up everyone, it's Cecil from Super Street and we're here in Huntington Beach, California with Gary from Designcraft. So behind me is the Mitsubishi EVO 8 that we took last event to Never Lift, which we had some cooling upgrades, and now we're getting ready for the second half of the build, which we're going to be actually debuting it at Speed Ring later in September. So Gary, could you tell us more about what you have planned for today and what's kind of like the overall build for the second half?
Yeah, so unlike Never Lift, which was a straight line, now we're focusing on road racing, which is a lot of turns, a lot of braking, a lot of straightaways. So we're gonna start adjusting some of the stuff like the brakes, and then also a lot more power in the engine. So there'll be some engine tuning, there'll be some suspension tuning, and then, yeah, we'll see how it goes from there.
Cool, I'm excited. Well, I'm gonna let you do your thing and then we'll get back to you.
Sounds good. When pressing in these studs, the most common thing you want to look for is just the fact that the alignment of the stud is pressed in all the way. The last thing you want is the stud to sit in crooked that way or the other way. Granted, it will line up pretty close, but later on what I'll show you is how little off it can be, and it'll actually make a really big difference. So now that we have all our studs pressed inside this hub, it's just a really good common practice to actually just make sure that the studs actually line up, and they basically just have to fit like that, so you know that they go in. Sometimes there'll be one of them that just needs to be pressed in a little bit more, and it'll make it to where only like 4 of them go in versus like 5. So we're actually pretty good right now. So from here, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and bolt this one back in. And then since we do have to do the brake pads, we might as well just do that since we're already in that area. So with the pins out, what we want to do next is we want to compress these pistons back inside of the actual caliper. Now there's 4 of them in here, so we got to compress these 2 and these 2, which means that when we compress these first ones, we have to hold it in there while we actually compress these other ones. So what I usually do is if you're going to use your old brake pad, that'll actually push 2 of them in at one time. So you just want to put a clamp on it, and you'll see it starting to clamp down right there. To keep the brakes from squeaking, you kind of want to install some of the brake lube. So you just basically put it on the back side of the pad, just smear it on there, and you're going to go ahead and slip your new pad in. But you also want to lube up these pins as well. So you would just lube it up like that and install this one. Okay, so now that our wheel studs are pressed into the hub and our brake pads are on, we're gonna go ahead and not replace the rotors because these were literally like next to brand new. So we're gonna go ahead and stick with these ones. What we're not gonna do is we're not gonna install this axle nut on right now, only because we gotta jump back into the engine bay and we're gonna go ahead and pull the transmission out and start doing the clutch and the flywheel. Okay, so with the Egg City flywheel, what you'll notice that there's one hole that's a little bit smaller size and it's not on center with the rest of them. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to line up this hole with the pin mark on the crank right here. Now the other thing you want to make sure that you do is we actually add a little bit of Loctite on each one of these flywheel bolts. Just a dab, or if you have the liquid one, just put a dot and it's good. Okay, so with this Egg City twin disc, what you're going to notice is there's a TM side and another TM side. That just basically means transmission side. The other one right here says FW side and TW side. So that's basically flywheel side. So this is gonna be the first one that you actually load. There's blue paint marks on these discs. There's also a blue paint mark right here on the flywheel, and there's also one on the floater plate too. So you wanna make sure that you line up all those blue marks because this thing was basically balanced as a whole assembly. Since we had the transmission out, we decided to end up putting a black flag center diff inside of the transmission. So that's all fastened up inside there, and the last thing we gotta do is just install the transfer case. So we got our transmission and our axles in, so we're on to the next part, which will include installing the turbocharger, the intake manifold, fuel pump, as well as all the AAM electronics. So we'll show you that on the next part.